Michael Morales Torres para Lucha Libre Online, la marca número 1 de Pro Wrestling y Combat Sports en español. Mi co-host para la noche de hoy, Josean Montesino de Puerto Rico para el mundo, pero directo desde Orlando, Florida. Y lo importante, de Sweetwater, Texas para el mundo. Campeón mundial peso completo de la WWE. The Wrestling God himself llega aquí a Lucha Libre Online. The one and only John Bradshaw Layfield. It's here with us tonight. John, it is an absolute honor to have you as our guest. How are you doing today, sir?
The honor is mine. I wish I knew enough Spanish to do this interview in Spanish. I've spoken Spanish a little bit since I was a kid growing up in West Texas, and I'm trying to learn Spanish now as an adult, but it's not going very well. So one of these days, maybe I can do this interview with you in Spanish.
Hopefully it will happen in the future. That was actually my first question. You grew up in Texas, a state where a lot of Latino population are living. The Lucha Libre culture, you know, is part of the state, but as well as the pro wrestling with the Von Erichs, among many, many other legends inside the industry. The Briscoes were there for a lot of time as well. How did JBL got caught inside the wrestling industry for the first time, because you were a former football player? How did that transition happen?
I was playing football. In fact, I was playing in Texas. I was playing in San Antonio in the World League of American Football. Mike Riley was our head coach. He went on to coach San Diego Chargers and Lincoln with Nebraska. Jason Garrett was our quarterback, who ended up being a coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And I got cut my second year. I like to think it's because of injuries, maybe because of the lack of talent, but had a lot of injuries. And I met someone who had wrestled in Japan. And I thought, man, I'd always been a wrestling fan. One of my youngest memories was watching wrestling with my grandfather in Sweetwater, Texas. And so I'd always wanted to be a wrestler. I was just kind of hoping I'd play football for 8 or 10 years. And when that didn't work out, I thought, I've got a chance now to do something that I wanted to do since I was a kid, and hopefully be young enough that I can make a living at it. So that's when I started looking into getting into wrestling.
That's awesome. I believe Josean will have the second question.
Yeah, so let me put myself right for this occasion. Yeah. So we all remember how crazy, and this is getting a little bit into your run directly with WWF at the time. We all remember how crazy was the Brawl for All. So I want to ask you, how crazy was to be there? How do you feel when you get this news of, hey, you're gonna be there? Obviously, a lot of people always say, hey, John is a badass. You don't want to mess with him inside that ring. How do you take that notice, and how was that?
Well, most of the guys were tough guys, back then, and they may be today. I don't know the crew today. I'm sure they are today too. It came about, I got called on a Thursday by Bruce Pritchard, who's a dear friend of mine. And he said, you want to be in a shoot fight on Monday? And I said, why would I be in a shoot fight? And he said, we're doing a shoot tournament, a legit boxing wrestling tournament. And he said, will you be in it? And I said, well, yeah, I'll be in it. I'd never done anything like it. I loved it. I loved the training for it. I didn't have time to train for that first fight, but I'll tell you this, and Bruce Pritchard to this day will say it was a shoot. I don't think it was, because I told him, I said, you're going to put me out there with Henry Godwin first, aren't you? Because they wanted to see the two big, country boys go at each other. And he said, no, it's a shoot. We're going to do a legit draw. Well, I get there on Monday and I'm fighting Henry Godwin, just like I'd called. So Bruce said it was coincidence. To this day, I don't believe that.
So something that amazed a lot of people is how you have multiple runs as a tag team and then by yourself. And in both, you have a lot of success. What it takes to be success as a tag team, as individual and single. You became one of the longest WWE champions at the time, and a lot of people remember APA until today. What it takes to go there.
It takes someone else. In a tag team, you have to rely on your partner, and you have to have a good partner. You can't do it alone. And I had great partners as a tag team. Ron Simmons to this day is my best friend, and I could never have dreamed of tagging with someone with the stature of Ron. You know, the first black heavyweight champion, a guy that everybody in the industry to this day respects. I mean, across the board, no one says anything bad about Ron. He's that kind of, he's just a fine human being, and he's a hell of a man. And it was just the perfect tag team partner for me. You know, I also had some other great ones. I had Barry Windham, I had Dick Murdoch, I tagged with Bob Orton Jr., Randy's dad. Had some great partners down in Texas, Bobby Duncombe Jr., and Black Bart, and quite a few guys that I tagged with that were, you know, terrific guys. I even tagged with Kane in Europe as the Zwei Meter und Zwei tag team in Bremen, Germany, working for Otto Wanz and Peter William. So to me, it takes two, and it takes two as a championship run too. You know, I'd like to think I was okay, but without Eddie Guerrero, there wouldn't have been a JBL. I mean, period. You would have never heard of me. You'd have heard of me that one night, but there wouldn't have been follow-up matches. I had the right guy in Eddie Guerrero, had the right guy in Undertaker and Booker T and Big Show, and all the guys I was fortunate to step in the ring with.
I was gonna ask you that specifically, so thank you for giving me that opportunity right now. How much Eddie helped you, and how much he means for you for that run? You're coming with a refresh personality, and he was the perfect combination for you at the time. How much did Eddie mean, and how much he helped you for that specific run?
Everything. You start with 100%. Eddie was everything to me. He was a good friend of mine. You know, he was a groomsman of my wedding, and I was did his part of his eulogy because we were such good friends. But Eddie wanted me to succeed, and Eddie was the right guy. If it'd been anybody but Eddie Guerrero to start with, I don't think JBL, you guys wouldn't be interviewing me today. You know, and if you were, you're interviewing me as Bradshaw, as part of the APA, because there wouldn't have been that championship run. It all hinged on Eddie. Eddie was the right guy, and he loved me enough and was selfless enough to be able to want to put me over and make me into a main event guy with him. And without him, and without that selfless act, JBL would not be here today.
I want to talk specifically about that moment. Eddie, in the Latin American community, despite not being born in Mexico, he's extremely beloved. Like in Latin America, that's a huge division of the Latinos that are born in the States versus the Latinos that are actually born in the countries. But to us, Eddie was.
He was only about a mile from Mexico, I think, when he was born.
I know.
So it's not like he was far off.
I know, but that's exactly the point. Like Eddie inside our culture is so beloved above anyone else inside the Latin American community. The first WWE championship that JBL won, the title that you won when you became the face of SmackDown, it was from Eddie's hands on Great American Bash. What do you recall of that historical night, if you're in your life?
Well, you know, it started at the Judgment Day, the pay-per-view before. And, you know, I knew that if this match didn't go well, that this was going to be a one-off. You know, they needed somebody for that match. And I think there was contingent we might do more. But it all depended on that one match. And Eddie worked so hard for me to get me over that match. That's what gave me the Great American Bash. And Eddie was, you know, he was ecstatic for me. And when I say that, I mean, here's a guy who worked his whole life to be a champion. And he was a great champion. In my mind, the greatest Latino star of all time by far. And when he lost the title to me, he was happy for me. And that tells you what kind of man Eddie Guerrero was. I just remember that night, you know, he was so happy that we had a good match, that he had done it right, and that things worked out well. And that's just, I can't say enough good things about Eddie.
Which actually leads me to my next point. There was a huge transition. I mean, we just touched one point of that. It was a huge transition of your career. You were Bradshaw, the APA, the rough guy. And suddenly we had this millionaire entering in a limousine with horns and the hat and the suits. And you became the most despised human inside the wrestling industry. How did that transition happen? How much of your mind work was in JBL? And the most important thing is the JBL we saw on TV a higher volume of the real John Layfield in real life?
I hope not. That guy was a dick. He was a bad guy. You know, I grew up in West Texas, and so Eddie and I had a lot of the same similarities of growing up and experiences. And we used to see these oil field rich guys, and they were just brazen with their money. They throw money in everybody's nose and drive around. I remember in the town where I grew up, Sweetwater, there were a couple guys who had DeLoreans. One guy had a Lamborghini. You know, they were just they hit oil, and they love to throw the money around. And I hated those guys. And I thought, if I hate those guys enough, then everybody else will hate them too. And so that was the impetus for JBL, was that guy that I couldn't despise growing up. So when you ask, is JBL John Layfield turned up? The promos were colorful, which I hope John Layfield is, and the promos were entertaining, which I hope John Layfield is. But as far as the views, 100% diametrically opposed to me.
One of the things that amazed the people from the APA run were the promos, the segment, how much you both, it seems that you enjoy a lot the time. How fun and how real it was that, because we all saw the brawls, we all saw the segment, the poker, all that stuff. How real and how fun was to produce all that we run.
Well, you ask if JBL is John Layfield turned up, and my answer is no, because hopefully I'm not that bad a guy. But if you ask Bradshaw, 100%. That was me and Ron. Me and Ron, that was us. That was just us. They couldn't write for us, and they didn't try. They were smart enough just to kind of say, here's what we need. You guys put it in your own words and figure it out, you know, which is, to me, always the best way to write. And I'm not taking any shots at any way anything's done now, because I don't know how it's done now because I'm not there. But we had some guys, Tommy Blancha and Brian Gewirtz, who were just really smart guys that helped us frame stuff, but then let us be ourselves. And so that was just us, man. Me and Ron had so much fun, and we had some great times in those APA skits.
I really enjoy one of the documentary that WWE did from the APA, and it really amazed me. Like, I was like 4 or 5 years old when that happened, so having me the opportunity of saw that and saw how you all create this bonding together, and how much people suffer when you all get separate, which leads me to, you become the champion, you became this huge heel that me personally, as I was a kid, I despised JBL. I was like, ah, man. You have this really important feud with Cena, when Cena was getting, you know, this huge push and people was loving him. Talk to me about, you know, how important was that, was that rivalry at the time, because you're going to WrestleMania in LA with Cena, and he ended up beating you for the WWE Championship, the first one of 16. Talk me about a little bit of that.
Well, I worked with John, you know, and there's a big difference in having an 8-minute match and having a 25 to 30-minute match. It's not even, you know, in the same classification. You know, 8-minute match is easy. You know, you do your start, you do your heat, you go home. 25, 30-minute match, you have to take people on a roller coaster ride, you know, and a lot of people never make that transition. I think Cena had done it some with Kurt Angle, who's one of the greatest of all time, I believe. So I may have been the second guy with him, but I just remember how good he was right away. And that's deep water. I mean, that's people get in that and they get lost, and he didn't. And I just remember, this young guy is incredibly talented. I mean, you could look at his physical attributes. This really good looking guy with this incredible body, but he had everything. And I mean, everything from the start. Now, I never dreamed that he'd be 16-time world champion. I thought he was going to be the guy. But you know, once you reach, there's a difference between being the guy and being that guy that transcends the genre, which he has done. And I could not be more happy for him. And I could not be more happy that I was the guy that was there. You know, I take no credit for his career, take no credit for anything. He would have been there no matter what, but I'm really happy that I was the guy that was there.
John, on the Hall of Fame or the WWE Hall of Fame, like there was a name that was missing until the 2020 class, and that was you. Like everyone was constantly asking, when will JBL finally get his induction? He has the credentials, he has the CV, he's done everything in his career, and you finally got that opportunity. You got that ring, you got to the immortal or the immortals, you know, of the Hall of Fame. That's basically the peak of a wrestler's career. Like that's the cream of the crop. That's the top. That's the highest you can get. How did that feel at that moment when you got the notice, hey, JBL, we are finally inducting you into the Hall of Fame. You deserve every success you had in your career?
Vince McMahon called me personally. And, you know, I don't know how many people, you know, calls, but he called me, and I was, you know, I see the number and it's Vince, and I'm always happy to talk to the boss. And he said, I want you to come to the Hall of Fame. And I said, yeah, I'd be happy to, whatever you need. He goes, no, you're going in it. I started laughing. I said, he goes, can you make it? I go, well, I can now. So I was thrilled. I mean, like I say, one of my youngest memories was sitting with my grandfather on the couch there in Sweetwater watching wrestling. And to go in the Hall of Fame years later with guys like Bruno Sammartino, Hulk Hogan, Stone Cold, you know, the names that are in there. I mean, it's just unbelievable to even think that my name is anywhere close to those legends in the same institution. So it was really a dream come true.
It amazed a lot of people that you ended up wrestling until WrestleMania 25. You retired young because you were young at the time. Well, you're young right now, but you ended up fighting in multiple eras: Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression, and the beginning of the PG. How do you feel the evolution of wrestling and sports entertainment, being you part of those three amazing eras?
I love the evolution. You know, I was started in the territory era. So, you know, I started in Dallas with the territories were dying, but they were still alive. And then to make it through the Attitude Era and you know, in 95, for those that don't remember, business was terrible. You know, in WWE, when I got there in December of 95, we had the NWO and Bret Hart with us. Now, they weren't before they went to WCW. We had Stone Cold, but he was a ringmaster. We had Kane, but he was a dentist. We had Triple H, but he was an aristocrat. You know, we had one of the greatest rosters of all time that became that roster that could have, that did ratings that I don't think will ever be equaled. And so that was a really cool time to be there, to see that progression and to see the Attitude Era, and then to go into the Ruthless Aggression era, as they call it, in the PG era. You know, it's just every era you have to change, and you always have to be a step ahead. And I think that's what we're seeing in the wrestling business. And I frankly have loved every era. You know, to me, the Attitude Era was the favorite, but that's the first time I really got to be part of something. So to me, I'm biased.
I want to talk, and if you allow me, I want to say something in Spanish as well for this part of the interview. Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw. Las historias de Briscoe y de Gerald Briscoe y de JBL les va a volar la cabeza. Todas las personas que más saben de esta industria, que más la han vivido, que han sacrificado todo, que tienen historias en Texas, en Alemania, en Japón, en Puerto Rico, en todas partes, se unen y crean un solo podcast que les vuela la mente a todo el mundo como parte de la plataforma Podcast Hit. Está disponible en podcasthit.com o podcasthit.com. Todas las plataformas de audio, y también están disponibles en redes sociales Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw, tanto en Instagram como en Twitter, al igual que John Bradshaw Layfield. Lo pueden seguir en sus redes sociales en Instagram y en Twitter como John Bradshaw Layfield, which actually leads me to my next point, and to me this is actually the most exciting part of the interview because I follow the content. I'm constantly consuming the podcast. How did John Bradshaw Layfield got paired up with Gerald Briscoe, which is, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant minds inside of the wrestling industry? And suddenly, when people thought you were going to destroy bookings or do something controversial, no, you're literally talking about the industry, about your life, about what you've experienced, about what's happening now, and at the same time, but with respect. So how did this pair up of JBL and Gerald Briscoe happen?
Well, Mr. Briscoe hired me in WWE. You know, Bruce Pritchard and Pat Patterson ended up calling me first. So I got over to WWE, and Briscoe was the one that pulled me aside with J.J. Dillon and hired me. And we've been, you know, really, really close friends ever since. When I first went on my European tour, I would sit up front with Jerry, and we'd play cards. And, you know, we'd go out at night and have cocktails together. We hit it off very well, and we have since the first day we met each other. And we were calling each other during COVID. You know, I love Jerry. I could talk to Jerry every day, all day. He's such a good man, just a good human being. And he's so knowledgeable about the business. You know, he was there. I remember we're talking about a match one time with Buddy Rogers and Pat O'Connor. That was 1960 or 60, I think, Comiskey, or 63. It was in the early 60s in Comiskey Park. Famous match. And he had tag team with Buddy Rogers. And I thought, who is this guy? You know, he's been around for so much of the wrestling business, and we were just BSing and having fun. And somebody told us, a good friend of ours named Yoshi, if he's watching this, told us, he said, you should do a podcast. And I said, I don't think anybody would want to listen to a podcast. And he goes, does it matter if anybody listens? You have fun. And that's what we do. We get our old friends on, we tell stories. We don't bury people. You know, if our guest buries them, you know, that's up to them. You know, we don't tell people not to, but that's not our gig. We don't deal with controversy. We tell fun stories. We tell stories about Michael Hayes moonwalking in a bar in Louisiana, running into a ceiling fan. We tell stories about Hornswoggle having a chicken put on the ring with him in Mexico. And we got footage of that. We have a lot of fun. Some of these stories and some of these characters, you have to understand, were, you know, Tommy Rich was the hottest guy in the world of wrestling in the early 80s. You know, and today that's foreign to people because he was big in the Carolinas, but probably wasn't big on the West Coast. You know, now everybody's global superstars or you're not. So we just have a lot of fun getting old friends on the podcast and just telling some of the craziest stories you've ever heard. And one thing about it is they're talking to friends, to contemporaries. So it's not like they're talking to reporters and they're guarded or anything. This is just guys talking like they would talk in the back or in a car in a bar, having a good time. Or at least that's the idea.
Which actually leads me to my next point. You've done so many things in your career inside the wrestling industry, and now you grab a microphone along with one of your best friends and you're doing a podcast. How challenging has been the transition to open up about what you've lived inside the wrestling industry and tell the people, hey, this is me, this is Gerald, this is Jerry, this is our life, this is our stories?
If it wasn't for Gerald Briscoe, I don't think I'd do it. You know, he's that good of a friend of mine, and I think that much of him. And when we talk to each other, we bring stuff out of each other. You know, if it was just me alone on a podcast, I don't think I could do it. But I'm talking to Jerry like I'm talking to an old friend, which is exactly what he is. And it's very easy. You know, I was down today, and I'm in Orlando down at the WWE Performance Center filming some stuff for Rivals, for a new documentary stuff they got coming out. And I run into some old wrestling friends, and it's just like what I do with Jerry. You know, we sat there and talked for an hour about nothing important, but just had a great time and laughed the entire time. It's what we enjoy doing, and it's what we miss when we're out of the business.
We've been seeing a lot of tweets, and we know the WrestleMania, it will be in Dallas, Texas. AT&T Stadium, and we've been seeing one specific person talking trash about Texas. We've been seeing Kevin Owens trying to get into people's skin, and we know WrestleMania is almost there. You know, we've been seeing that Booker T and yourself has been like back and forth on Twitter. What do you have to say to Kevin Owens? And there's WrestleMania out there. There's something that you want to tell us?
Well, I said in one of my videos that I put out that I hope that he was watching the video and he fell into a sewer and got stuck there until midsummer. So I'm hoping that's what happened to him. And I hope he's stuck in a sewer right now. So, and apparently if I want a piece of Kevin Owens, I got to get behind Booker T, because apparently there's a long line of Texas old guys that want to beat up Kevin Owens.
Talking about that, me personally, I consider you one of the biggest heels of all time. Did a great job, and we know that the list is long, but for me, you're one of them. And for me, there is a lack of heels nowadays. People who want to get booed. Which wrestler or sports entertainer do you see nowadays? And you say, this guy reminds me of myself when I was, I don't know, 1999 or 2004, 2005, that you say, he reminds me of myself.
And I want to be fair in this answer, and I'm going to answer only about WWE guys. And the reason is I don't watch other wrestling programs, and I don't mean any disrespect with that. I love betting on sports, and so I watch sports all the time. And the only wrestling that I make time for is WWE. So I'm not versed in guys that are in other organizations. So if there's guys out there, I don't want to disrespect anybody out there. So I'm just going to talk about WWE guys because that's where my sweet spot is. I've always thought Baron Corbin was a guy who reminded me of myself. I think Baron is a really smart guy. Baron wants to be a heel, and very few people are like that. I don't know if Randy Orton reminds me of myself. I think Randy's a lot better than me, but Randy is a guy that can do anything. He can be a heel. Randy's one of these guys, man. There's only a few every generation that really want to be heels. Piper told me the same thing. Hot Rod did. And it's true. Guys want to be, sometimes they want to be a cool heel. They want to be, and there's all kinds of different heels, there's also attraction heels. D-Generation X drew money and sold merchandise. They were technically heels, but they weren't heels like JBL. They were attraction heels. That's okay. They sold out buildings, man. There's nothing, one is not right and one is not wrong. But to be a pure heel like JBL, there's not that many people that either want to be or have the ability to be. And some, when they come along, are like the NWO or DX. They're so cool that people don't want to boo them. And so it's not really a heel, but that's not their fault. They draw money just like anybody else. Not like anybody else does. They drew a lot more money than everybody else does. But that's okay. That there's not a right or wrong with that. There aren't that many people who really want to be a heel.
John, the wrestling industry is on a complicated state or status. Like, you've had more eyes globally in the product. You have more money than even in the 90s, in the 2000s, in the companies and everything. However, for some reason, the weekly ratings of all the products in general are decreasing compared to what it was in the 90s. Obviously, we had an evolution with technology and everything. But we want to pick your brain. You've been one of the most brilliant heels we've ever seen inside this industry. What does JBL or John Layfield thinks the wrestling industry needs in order to attract a bigger audience?
I'm not in WWE right now, and I don't speak about other companies here just because I don't know them, and not because of, I'm trying to avoid them. I just don't know them like I know WWE. I'm not in WWE, so I don't know what's going on with the inner mechanisms of the company. I always think in every generation, you need what I call a super heel. You look at, say, Game of Thrones, when the Battle of the Bastards, you look at Walking Dead with the Governor, you've always got one guy that has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And that guy becomes a super heel in every episodic show. And I always think that you need something like that. But now, that being said, people don't want to boo Brock Lesnar, and people don't really want to boo Roman Reigns. And those guys are incredible attractions. I'm a huge fan of both those guys. Those guys are on top in any era in the history of this business. They're that good. And so, I think the proliferation of cable television and how people watch stuff has changed. And I think that affects the ratings to a degree. We didn't have social media. These guys are getting millions and millions of views off social media and YouTube and all the different ways for people to watch content. I'm not sure that more people aren't watching it now than ever before.
I completely agree with that. Before we go, one last thing as well in Spanish and in English as well. podcastheat.com, podcastheat.com, stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw, one of the best podcasts out there today, genuine, authentic, organic. Things are as they live, as they live it during their lives. Lo han vivido toda su vida. Dos tipos que son sumamente auténticos, lo han hecho toda la industria. Vayan directamente, denles el follow y créanme, vale la pena cada segundo de su tiempo a través de podcastheat.com o a través de las redes de Stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw en Twitter y en Instagram, o John Bradshaw Layfield en sus redes sociales. John, it's been an absolute honor, sir, to have you as our guest. We wanted to wish you success, not only in your career, but as well in your personal life. Enjoy that non-alcoholic brewski. And thank you very much for your time, sir. It's been a blast.
Unfortunately, it's non-alcoholic. It's so will be a good morning for me because it's non-alcoholic. Guys, thank you very much. I enjoyed being on the show with you. And I apologize to both of you for being late. We had some traffic issues, which people won't know about because they're going to see the show when they see it. But I apologize to you guys for being late.
No worries. On the opposite, we thank you for your time. And let's wrap this up en español. Josean Montesino, Michael Morales y WWE Hall of Famer, the Wrestling God, JBL para Lucha Libre Online, la marca número 1. Sí, gente, la número 1 de Pro Wrestling y Combat Sports en el mundo.